It's Mo. It is the middle, oh my gosh, the middle of October, and I did not do the Savidge Prompts for September. The Savidge Prompt for September was to read a book from a country that you visited. Now we're in the middle of October, and I want to start doing October's prompt, which is to read a book with food in the title. So I want to flub the September prompt a little. One of my ideas for doing the September prompt was to read a bunch of books from the US. And every time I read a book from a state that I'd been to in the US, I was like, oh shoot, I should have vlogged this so that I could have put it in my Savidge vlog. But I never did. So I went back through the last 10 books that I read, and 6 of them were books that were set in places that I had visited. One of those was a novel in verse, and one of them was a short story collection, so I decided not to include those. But the 4 other books that I read recently, all set in the US, all set in different states, and they're all states that I have been to, even down to like cities that I have been to in some cases. I thought I would just talk about those quickly and talk about and explore the idea of reading books that are set in places that you visited and like what your feelings of them are. Now, these aren't the best books to do that with because they aren't necessarily books that are about the places that they're set in per se, but let's go through them and I'll try to explain further. So the first book that I read that was from the US and set in the state that I visited was Murder at Hotel 1911 by Audrey Cohen. This is a cozy mystery set in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and it's about a hotel in Chattanooga and a young woman who is discovering secrets about that hotel, but is interrupted when a murder occurs. The next book that I read that fits into this project is The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. This book is about an actress who is kind of killing her career by drinking too much, and her mother sends her to their vacation home in Vermont, which I have been to many times. Third is The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz. This is about a writing retreat that takes place in upstate New York, another area of the world that I have been to many, many times and will continue to visit. And the last book for this particular series is Catherine House, which is about a very strange boarding school in rural Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is part of my tri-state area, so I thought this would be a good one to include as well. I love to read books that are about places that I've been to, especially books that are about places that I've been to a lot and that I know a lot about. If there are things that I can recognize, if there are landmarks and eateries and museums and different things that you know about that you can see represented in books, I just always think that's so fun. And then I also like to read books in places that I've been that maybe I don't know that much about so that I can feel immersed in those places. 2 of my favorite places to read about like that are New Orleans. So I don't know a ton about New Orleans. I've been there 3 or 4 times. I really love it. It's a place that I could see myself living at some point. And I love to read books that depict New Orleans the way the authors see them. I don't know enough about New Orleans to know exactly if the depiction is great or not, but I love to see their depiction of it and compare it to my own experiences. I love to read about Vermont. Paul Auster, who lived in Brooklyn but visited Vermont often, just like I did for a time, writes amazingly about Brooklyn and Vermont, and those are both places that I really enjoy and know a lot about. Now, Brooklyn I know a lot about. I know intimately in many parts of Brooklyn, so hearing people write about that, seeing their take on it is sometimes harder because I'm like, oh, that's not in this place, or like, he's talking about Park Slope, but it's that part's really in Crown Heights or whatever, and I get a little too like persnickety about it. But when he writes about Vermont, he writes a little bit more broadly. Sometimes there are notable landmarks and things that are exciting that I can say like, oh, I've been there, like, oh, I know that place, I know that road, I know that stretch. Those are places that I really like to read about, but I also like to read about more general ideas of places. It's interesting to read what people have written about New Jersey because New Jersey gets such a bad rap that it's often used as almost like the butt of a joke. New Jersey can be wonderful. New Jersey can be terrible, but New Jersey can be wonderful, and there's so much diversity of landscape here, so many different areas. We have very distinct ecosystems in some places, and it's a really different and interesting state with so many places that you could write about, but people tend to write about like the same places or the same idea of New Jersey. I think the books that I read here were a little bit more about the idea of the place. In Murder at Hotel 1911, she's writing about Chattanooga, and she's definitely writing about the town to a certain extent. I haven't been there enough to know the landmarks that she maybe mentions. Even if she did mention landmarks, although she knew the town well, this book did feel like she was more talking about a general idea of a place instead of the actual locations of a place. And she was creating false places for her book that people could bicycle to and things like that. To me, Chattanooga didn't seem like a super bicycle friendly place, but maybe it is. In The Writing Retreat and in Catherine House, both of these are set in very, very rural areas, and they're set far away. Both are very isolated situations where people can't leave the writing retreat or the college, depending on which book you're looking at. I think Catherine House was interesting because it situated the area of the book more firmly in the reality of the rest of the United States. So they talked about how close they were to New York and Philadelphia, and how, although Philadelphia is a big city, New York is a huge city. And they talked about its relationship to LA. When students left Catherine House, they were planning on going all the way to California. So Catherine House felt very rooted in its location in the United States, but not necessarily right in its location in rural Pennsylvania. The Writing Retreat didn't feel rooted in America at all. The only proximity that they talked about was New York, but New York to upstate New York could be different planets for all the people in upstate New York are concerned. And New York is a huge state, even if it doesn't look like it is. It takes hours to get from New York City to a rural area of the state, but that worked to the advantage of this, I think. Like, it did feel very remote from New York. It felt very isolated, and even though maybe it's only a few hours away, it did feel like the feeling that you get when you're driving in rural New York State and you're like, all your cell phone goes out and you're passing one building, you know, every 10 or 12 miles, and you're like, where am I? So in that respect, it felt grounded in its location. And then the house across the lake felt very much like Vermont to me. Yes, it used cliches to describe some of the things in Vermont, the lakes, the foliage, things like that. But to me, this felt very Vermont. The way that non-Vermonters were talked about, the way that people came for the summers, which, although it is not Vermont's high season, for certain people it is Vermont's high season. When I visited Vermont, it was in the summer. This takes place just after the summer, when the leaf peepers are starting to come up, when all the summer people have left. You haven't gotten the winter people yet. You haven't gotten the people at ski houses. And there are different areas of Vermont, so there are mountains all over. It is the Green Mountain State. The skiers tend to go to certain places, and the summer people tend to go to other places. To me, this felt very, very Vermont. The way the houses in the small community around the lake were described, the way you had to drive out to go to a liquor store or a grocery shop was very Vermont. So I think that this felt very, very Vermont to me, which I really enjoyed having been there. It was also definitely the book that was based in the place that I've been the most, so that could have added to it. But if I had to rank how I thought that these felt, I think I would put the least like the place that it's from on the bottom, but it's also the place that I know the least, so maybe this is not the best choice. And then let's do a stand-in for Catherine House would be here. I read Catherine House on audio. Although it felt grounded in the US, this book didn't give me a lot of Pennsylvania feel. Then I would definitely put The Writing Retreat next, because it did feel very rural upstate New York. I could picture driving on those roads and feeling isolated at a house upstate. Definitely the most like the place that it was written about, I would pick The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. It felt felt very, very Vermont to me. I think it captured the Vermont vibes really well. Even the isolation of Vermont, where you might see 10 houses around a lake, but getting to those houses makes you feel isolated in and of itself, or having to row across a lake to get to your neighbor's house felt very Vermont. So this would be the ranking of the last 4 books that I read about a country that I have visited, which is the US, and specifically states that I have visited. And that is going to be my take on the Savidge prompt for September. The Savidge prompt for October is books with food in the title. I really didn't think I had any books with food on the title. I was like, oh my god, I don't know what I'm going to do. And then I realized that my pick for the TBR spin for October, The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver, has food in the title. And I was like, oh, I don't want to read this for this prompt, but let me go through my books and see if there's anything else. And I did find some books with like water in the title. And I was like, well, if I can't find anything else. And then I found The Mango Opera by Tom Corcoran. I read the second in this series quite a while ago now. It was since we moved to Asbury Park, but it was before I started BookTube and before I started Goodreads. It is on my Goodreads. And I remember really liking it. It also had food in the title. I can't remember what the second book is called. I don't think it's in here. So I wanted to pick this one up, and I actually purchased this from Thrift Books a few years ago, and I was like, okay, mango, great, let's see what else I can find. And then I started finding books with food in the title. So I found Honey Girl. This is on my end of year TBR. This is a coming of age / romance sort of about a young woman who marries a person they just met. I found The Fruit of the Lemon by Andrea Levy. I got this because I really wanted to read Small Island by Andrea Levy, but I found this book in a little free library, so I decided to pick it up. I don't know what this is about, but fruit is a food and lemon is a food, so this has 2 foods, so this is a possibility. Then I found another fruit book. I found Fruit of a Drunken Tree by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. Again, I don't know what this is about. It's such a beautiful cover. I love this kind of flower. They're really huge and they like droop and their blooms open down towards the ground. They're so beautiful. One of my favorite gardens, the Leonard J. Buck Garden in New Jersey, has a bunch of them around. They're really gorgeous. And it's blurred by Sandra Cisneros, which is cool. Another fruit book, I found Bitter Fruit by Ahmet Dangor. It was a finalist for the Booker Prize, which I didn't even realize. I didn't include this in my Booker video. I didn't realize I had it and that it was nominated. So I don't know what this one is about, but it has fruit in the title. And then finally, I very recently picked up Pineapple Street by Jenny Jackson. This, I think, is kind of an intergenerational tale about Brooklyn. Intergenerational is not a buzzword for me. Brooklyn is a buzzword for me. I am excited to get to this eventually. So now I have quite a few books to choose from for my October read. And I think what I'm going to do is probably do a little more research on these books, maybe try a couple of pages and decide what book I want to read for my October prompt and what book I want to read for the end of this vlog. And then I will come back to you once I've decided and let you know which book I chose. I decided which book I was going to read for the October food in the title prompt, and I went with Honey Girl, partly because I'm also supposed to be reading this in the end of the year TBR, partly because I've tried to read this a couple times and I haven't been successful, but I am currently a third of the way through. I don't know if you can see that. I am enjoying it. I stopped reading it for the last like 2 days because I wanted to film this update and I just kept not filming it. And it's the kind of book where when I'm not reading it, I don't want to pick it up. When I am reading it, I'll read like 50, 60 pages at a time. But when I'm not reading it, I'm like, I don't know if I really want to read that. I don't know if I really want to pick it up. I am enjoying it when I'm reading it though. So this book follows, what's her name? Grace Porter. who in the very first chapter we find out gets married to a stranger in Las Vegas. She's in Las Vegas with her two best friends. She meets a girl, spends the night with the girl, and in that night she gets married. Then Grace leaves Las Vegas and goes back to her normal life where she has just completed her PhD in astronomy, and she is feeling a little untethered. She knows that she has to go get a job, but she feels like she's been fighting for this degree and fighting for the choices that she makes and the choices that she wants to make for so long that then finding a job in that degree feels really daunting. And obviously being a person of color, working in science is not easy, and it's hard to find a job. She feels like it's a big undertaking right after she's just completed a big undertaking, and she's feeling very overwhelmed. So as we're learning that, we're also meeting her two best friends and the circumstances under which they met. We're also learning about Grace's familial relationship, so her relationship with her mother, who she hasn't lived with since she was a child, and who owns a orange grove in Florida. And Grace really misses being there with her mom, but her mom like travels a lot and does a lot of things, and she was taken away from her mom when she was a child by her father, who is in the army. So they moved to Portland, Oregon. He remarried and all this stuff, but he's just like really tough. And one of the things that Grace is struggling with is her relationship with him. She really loves him. She knows he cares for her, but he is so tough, and Grace is really feeling that she needs like someone to support her. So as those things are going on, she's also trying to figure out who this girl was that she got married to and determine whether that could be a relationship or whether that could be even a thing that happens. So in the very beginning, when Grace returns from Las Vegas, she thinks a lot about her new wife, but she doesn't use the items that the wife left to be able to reach out to her. Eventually, she does reach out to her new wife who lives in New York. We're just getting to the point now where they've talked a couple times on the phone, and Grace is like really struggling with her life in Portland, and she wants to go visit her mom. Her mom says it's not going to help to come visit her, kind of saying like, don't bother coming. And instead of going to Florida, Grace goes to New York. So Grace is going to meet her wife. I think the idea that Grace is going to find out if they can have a relationship, but mostly Grace, I think, is going there to step away from her life, how it currently is, and see if she can figure out her life how she wants it to be. So I do find the premise interesting. I like the idea, but the way that it's written is like very flowery, very purple prose. It reminds me so much of Weetsy Bat by, I can't think of the author's name right now. I'll put it down below. But I loved the Weetsy Bat books when I was a kid, and I thought they were so amazing, and I wanted to write just like her, and I wanted all my books to have that amazing feeling nostalgia and love and magic and cuteness and bizarreness and magic pixie dream girlness, queerness, and all those things. Like, I loved those books, and this book feels very, very much like that. I would not be surprised at all if Morgan Rogers read those books, because they are very similar in their like tone and cadence and the way that things are described. I don't know if I like love that anymore. It would be interesting to reread Weetsy Bat after I'm finished with this. I mean, I've read that book a million times when I was a kid, but it would be interesting to see if the comparison holds up if I read them back to back. I also feel like the nostalgia of it all is making me like weirdly emotional. One of the reasons that I don't want to pick this book up when I'm not reading it is because almost every time that I've read it, I've like teared up. But I don't think it's necessarily the subject matter. I don't identify with someone who has their whole life planned out for them and who worked their whole life towards a specific goal, because like that's not the experience that I had. I mean, I've definitely worked towards the goals that I've wanted, but I've never felt pressure to do anything or be anything unless I felt it for myself. And that is something that Grace struggles with. She puts a lot of pressure on herself as well as all the other people putting pressure on her. It's not the subject matter. It's not falling in love with a girl and getting married in Las Vegas. I've never done that. But it's the way that it's described and the way that it's told, the way that it's written, and just that nostalgic feeling, not only for the book of Weetzie Bat, nostalgia for the feeling of the feelings that I felt when I was reading Weetzie Bat when I was a kid, the kind of like longing and romanticism of life and love and queerness and all that good stuff. So in some ways I enjoy that nostalgia, but in a lot of ways I like don't enjoy it because it's like emotionally exhausting. That's how far I am in Honey Girl, and when I read some more, I will let you know. So I have finished Honey Girl and I liked it. I definitely cried throughout the entirety of this book. I think the familiar relationships and the friendship relationships and the casual queerness of it and the nostalgia of the writing all just led me to be very emotional. I have a very strong emotional response to parents accepting their queer children, which is weird because my parents accepted me, so I don't think it's like, you know, anything traumatic in my past or anything like that, but I love to see it and it makes me cry. It just makes me cry. I think overall I didn't like the second half of this book as much as I liked the first half. Our main character, Grace, becomes like very selfish, very self-centered, makes a lot of bad decisions that are based on nothing but being spoiled and being selfish. Although the book talks a lot about her being a person of color and a queer person, so she has many disadvantages, she's also extremely privileged. She has two parents to rely on who give her money, who help support her, who have homes that she can go to. She has friends who have jobs who she can turn to. She has a boss who's understanding when she leaves at the drop of a hat. Like, she's in an extremely privileged situation. She's extremely spoiled and she's extremely self-centered. So a lot of the choices that she makes affect other people extremely negatively, and I would think that would mar their relationships to an extreme degree. But in this book, they don't. Everything works out. It's fine. You know, she goes through work and she does have to grow and change, and some of those relationships are addressed, but even down to like her mother's wedding, she like turns it around and makes it all about her. She's like officiating her mother's wedding and talks about herself and her relationship with her mother. And it's like, how tone deaf are you? How selfish are you? How spoiled are you that at your mother's second wedding, you're turning it to be about yourself when it should be about the bride and groom and how much they love each other? So like, there were aspects of this book that really bothered me, but there were aspects of it that I did like. I think the flowery, whimsical, nostalgic aspect of the writing I like, but also in a lot of ways took away from the story, and in a lot of ways was super repetitive, and a lot of ways a little less of that could have made the story more impactful. I mean, I think some of the flaws in this book is that it's a debut and that the author is very, very young. So I'm interested to see what they do next. I'd be interested to see what Morgan Rogers goes on to do, and if this is her authorial voice or if this was the way that she wrote for this specific book, because it wasn't really clear from reading it which was which. Love the cover still. So beautiful. Love the girl love the casual queerness. I enjoyed this story, but it wasn't like my all-time favorite. And now we are on to the last few Savidge Prompts. I kind of cheated with September by picking multiple books, but I'm glad that I did. These reading challenges are just for fun, and you get to break the rules, you get to change the rules, because there are no rules. It's just for fun. I'm glad to be caught up on my Savidge Prompts. When I read another Savidge Prompt book, the prompt for November and December, I will definitely be making a vlog of it. So if you would like to see the other vlogs that I did for this series, they will be listed in a playlist down below. You can also check out my TBR Spin playlist, which is a very similar concept of different prompts that you get each month, and I do a vlog for them every month. So let me know if you've read Honey Girl. Let me know if you've read Weetzie Bat as well, and if you would compare the two. Let me know what your Savidge Prompt book was for October. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!